February 27th, SIG-NETWORK Services Gateway API. We are now recording, just for your information. Can people hear us? Okay, I think I heard someone say yes. Okay.
Yes.
Great. Okay. So we have a couple things on the agenda. I think it might be worthwhile doing NICs first because we have talked about it previously. What do you guys think? I think maybe that might be worthwhile just doing first so then we can kind of come to a conclusion.
Sure.
All right. Oh, is Nick here?
Oh, actually, yeah, I don't think he's on the call yet.
Oh, really? Is he on the bottom? Okay, no, all right, then we should move on. Okay. Let's see, so do we want to do traffic split? Danian, do you want to talk about traffic split or gateway?
Not sure. Yeah, we're missing him. He's
Joining.
Okay. So we'll leave this
Oh,
one.
yeah, he's not here either. All right. Okay, Micaiah, you're the only one here. Do you want to talk through this?
Sure. Well, this PR adds a few things. First of all, it's a follow-up to the PR that changed reference types from using local reference type or local object reference or typed local object reference to using specific references. It makes a few changes. One, I lay them out in the description. Make the group optional in object references. Right now, it can be empty, but it's not optional. So it's just an issue if you don't want to see nulls in your YAML or JSON definitions.
Right. Okay. And then let's see.
And then it adds namespace to route object references. I think that's probably the biggest change, and that relates to a couple other issues that have come up regarding the relationship between a route and a gateway. And I guess it's sort of an open question whether the gateway should be able to reference routes that are in other namespaces from the gateway itself. And the rest is adding some GoDoc to explain defaults and these relationships and what happens if a referent is not there.
Yeah, please take a look. I think we discussed in office hours yesterday and tried to get more visibility here. Like because most use cases, people do permissions based on namespaces. So like if you chop something into multiple resources from the purpose of RBAC and kind of different security requirements, requiring them all to be in the same namespace basically is kind of like useless for most people. So I think this makes sense. Also, you need to relaunch Chrome.
Great time.
So I think it makes sense to sort of have all these references go across namespaces. I think there was also another issue which was basically talking about the same thing, but from a user story perspective.
I think the counterpoint to that is that because of RBAC, you can't restrict what you can reference, right? So if you said, well, you can create gateways inside this namespace, and that's it, then you knew that they could only reference routes in that namespace. Whereas if you said you can create a gateway in every in this namespace, but it can reference routes anywhere, which is what this gives you, then you do lose it a little bit. Now, I don't imagine this is going to be an issue because I think gateways are a high enough level object. You're not going to.
But we should write that down because that's an interesting thing. Sort of, I don't want to steal your. You're the one who we were discussing this yesterday on the call. Is that it is okay from a RBAC perspective to say have something that is higher authority, like in terms of security, be able to sort of be open reference things that are lower security. So in this case concretely, it's like if you can create a gateway, then you can reference any route. The pushback to that would be that if we imagine like you have a self-service gateway where the app person is allowed to create gateways just for their own self-service kind of thing, and then they basically use that gateway to reference a route from a higher privileged thing. So then they can construct a load balancer to actually talk to that. So I think adding namespace to route makes sense from the resource model, but we need to figure out how to make that safe, I guess. So it might be worthwhile opening like the bigger issue and then sort of discussing what the consequences of it are.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of overlap with this and anything that moves towards label selectors. And because I think most label selector options also included a namespace selector or something else that would allow you to specify routes in different namespaces. So it's a common request. I think it just is, we need to be 100% sure we're fine with opening this up. As far as we're limiting how far we can lock this down with auth.
Yeah, do you guys?
But
go ahead.
Sorry.
Oh, there's no.
Wouldn't one of the hi, I'm here. Sorry, I made it. Wouldn't one of the things that you could do though have, because the gateway's behavior is mostly dictated by the controller that owns it, it would be okay for a particular controller to say, setting the namespace renders this one invalid as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
So one solution, you brought up another interesting point, is that the controller itself for the self-service probably can't read anyway.
If it's a completely separate controller, yeah.
Yeah. So maybe this just resolves itself just because like you could go and create a gateway to a highly privileged route, but it doesn't matter because the fact that you're running that controller means that it couldn't escalate those. Okay.
That doesn't make any sense, right?
Like sorry, you go, James.
Sorry, Nick. Typically, the controller is going to be running with very high privilege. The controller isn't going to be running as some unprivileged application account in the user.
Yeah,
right?
but
you definitely don't want multiple tenants within a cluster to be able to attach each other's routes to each other's gateways.
Yeah, I think we have to sort through kind of the models, because the thing I'm thinking of is that I give, Joe user, like he can run a pod that's like Nginx ingress controller, him or herself, right? And that one would never get escalated privileges because because they ran it, it wouldn't have it. But you're right that if you had a case where they were able to modify the gateway of a highly privileged one, could they refer?
Right.
But in that case, wouldn't they just, that's, like, would we want to control that, or would we just say, hey, just don't give them that privilege?
So that's what I'm saying, that I think that a lot of that comes down to the behavior of the controller that implements the gateway class, right? Like that's what I thought was the most important part about the discussion we had last week, was that a lot of the behavior of this spec is actually set by the controller that implements the gateway class. And so it's, if you have a controller that is doing a magic, everything is magic, everything is self-service style behavior, then it's going to have a different set of rules around, what's valid for various values. Like, it's going to have a different set of rules about how, can you go outside your namespace? Maybe it has a rule that says, no, you can't. If you're creating a gateway, only local, if you specify a namespace anything other than the one where the gateway is, then that is an invalid config.
This seems like a common enough use case. Is there a way that we could standardize on this so it's not
I think we should add it somewhere in the docs.
Well, yeah.
Like it has to be it can't live in the code comments, unfortunately.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the key part here though is that if we're going to have this distinction that a controller implements a gateway class and the gateways are sort of config requests to that controller for specific behavior, then it does mean that it's the combination of the gateway with the gateway class that it's associated with that sets the behavior of the gateway, right? And so there's going to be lots of cases where this sort of thing happens, where there's a field there that actually is not valid for some use cases. right? Like
right.
Or there's a field that has a different meaning based on the use case on the gateway class that you're talking to. That's like unavoidable in that model, right? Like, and so, you know, the namespace in this case is an example of a field that has a different meaning based on the gateway class you're attached to.
Yeah, so this, I think, okay, so we definitely need to document this, and I think some of the examples we just raised, we should just be like, if you're in this situation, then this is kind of the privilege that you would expect, like my run the off-the-shelf stuff for Joe user, and like it's safe there because it can't escalate, or your gateway class will be configured in a way that it can't escalate.
Yeah.
So we just
and so
explicit.
And so that this comes back to I think that James alluded to on a Slack conversation, in that one of the implications of this decision that to have, you know, sort of the controller plus gateway class equal dictate the behavior of the gateway, is that because of that, things like, it actually has a whole lot of flow-on effects to things like conformance. Like, conformance is actually only meaningful in the sense in the combination of a gateway class and a controller, and the settings that the controller brings to the gateway class. So you can't do conformance generally on a gateway.
Right.
The conformance on a gateway is only valid in the sense that how it relates to a particular gateway class. And that's why the conditions or similar on the gateway class that tell you about the behavior of the controller that implements that gateway class are vital.
Is there room though for some kind of shared standard conditions on the gateway class itself? Like, so far a gateway class is just a way to refer to parameters that are controller specific, but this seems like something that is shared between every controller needs to know how to handle this one way or another. So if you added this as part of gateway class or something like that.
Yeah, I think we should definitely describe it, because there seem to, in terms of, James, sorry.
That's okay. I agree with Nick that this is sort of behavior that's shared across components in the model, but I think the effort here is a specification, and I feel like the security model is maybe one of, if not the most fundamental properties of the specification. So if we just kind of throw up our hands and say it's all the gateway class controller's problem, and the gateway class controllers can do whatever they want here, then we really, operators don't really have any way of doing anything that's interoperable. And every implementer is going to have to figure out the security implementations themselves. And I think we should specify what the security model is. Not in this PR, but we should take it to another discussion.
Yeah, I totally agree that we could probably come up with like a small handful, hopefully less than like 5, or probably like 2 or I don't know. Anyways, we can come up with some small number of basically well-documented sort of templates that we expect controllers to kind of enforce in terms of the sort of this model. Like, is it something that the controller will enforce? Is it like you expect Joe user to use it, like those models that we talked about? And then we should definitely document them and then give them names. And then we could even do testing on conformance potentially, right?
Yes. Yeah, and that's what I was trying to say before, is that for those names, like for what those use cases, right, like we can define them via some set of behaviors that the gateway class does in each of those cases. Maybe it can share some of them between them, maybe it can't. And then the gateway class can have an equivalent of conditions. Obviously conditions is not really the right word, but like it's essentially feature flags on the gateway class, the behavior flags that say, implements this behavior, implements this behavior, implements this behavior. And then performance is actually about the set of gateway of behaviors that it implements.
So who wants to create that issue right now so we don't forget? GitHub, on GitHub. I can create it. Well,
I will create it. No,
I think as a starting point too, we should double check that we have captured user stories about the different namespace routing scenarios.
Yeah, and I think we can use this as the umbrella issue for all those, the individual ones, and that would be good. And then we can put it in the discussion for next week. Yeah.
I guess my feeling with user stories is that we should have one issue per user story as much as we can. Clearly there's a balance, but it seems likely that we might choose to implement some user stories but not others. And if we have a issue which has multiple user stories in it, then that becomes much harder.
Oh, I meant just for cross-reference so we can potentially close them. Right now, I don't think user stories have a, yeah, we'd have to figure out what the life cycle is.
I mean, I think if having individual user stories is useful because then you can talk more about the exact user story there and then you can link them in. I do agree that the life cycle of user stories is kind of undefined at the moment. It feels to me like the obvious thing here is that the user story's life cycle finishes when there is, code to handle that user story and like some sort of description of how you do it somewhere documented. But yeah, that's just off the top of my head. I can create a ticket now.
The best thing would be we put something in the cookbook. I know the cookbook is empty right now, but yeah, that would be the most ideal. Like
yes, for each user story should end up with a with an entry in the cookbook. Agreed. That's the right place that there should be documentation in the cookbook that says to be able to do this, here's the things you've got to do.
Okay. All right. So James,
I will create. I'll create the issue now.
All right.
Yeah.
Excellent. I think let's look at this PR. We could just probably merge it with the proviso that we have to resolve this issue because I don't know if we should just like hold up the PR just because of it.
Yeah, I think this is a common enough request that it would be good if these APIs could handle it, and it sounds like there's a feasible way to handle the security outside of this. So.
Yeah, so let's resolve that issue because that requires some further discussion. But then from a PR perspective, probably we can take care of this one. Any additional thoughts on this one?
I still need to rebase it for the PR30, the proto buff generation code. I'm having trouble getting it to regenerate when I rebase this PR. So I'll try to get that done and then it should be ready.
Okay. All right. Let's go to the next one. Is Daniel on the call?
Right. Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, I joined late.
Actually, then we should probably go to the first one.
Yep. We can handle this real quick. I think just to pop this up for folks to look at. So I saw Daniel, you were working on it quite a bit. So we can, this is more just for like, hey, probably folks look at this and then we'll discuss it next time in detail. But Daniel, do you want to give some summary of what you've been trying to grapple with here?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a starting point. Before this PR, I mean, traffic split was, just essentially scaffolding.
Right.
And so, I went through this exercise just so I could really start familiarizing myself with this area of service APIs, and I say this area meaning I kind of put traffic split under this umbrella of like post route manipulation, right? So we've already made the routing decision. Now we can do some manipulation to the traffic. And the more that I think about it, the more I question whether traffic split is even the right name. I think it's almost like, traffic shaping or traffic policy or something along those lines, because we can do a lot more than split, right? If we think traffic split, it's like, okay, well, we've got multiple endpoints within this service and I want to split that traffic across, endpoints with a label foo, send 80% of the traffic, and endpoints with a label bar, send that 20% of the traffic, right? That's a basic traffic splitting scenario. But I between the description there 1 through 5, and I think we could even extend that list. We start to go beyond just splitting the traffic, right? There's, I think Harry commented the concept of mirroring traffic,
right?
Just injecting additional behavior. If it's retries,
right. So
we could even inject delay, things like that.
Yeah, the thing that I'm curious, and this is a call out to all the implementers, is like, there was in the sketch some notion of like, you do this, and then you do this, and you do this. you know, like most of these proxy engine implementations have this notion of like filters, and then there's a certain ordering. The thing that would be good to kind of understand is from each of these implementations, sort of what that ordering is and whether or not we need to realize it in the API, or we it's generic enough such that if we do something in the API, that it is mostly going to be realizable in the implementations. Because if we're very, very prescriptive, then my fear is that like it will be only implementable by like 1 or 2 pieces of software, and then it's going to be a pretty hard adoption sell to like the other folks left out in the cold. On the other hand, right, we need to be able to represent these somehow, and if we can find that generic kind of ordering or order independent way to express it, that gets us a lot of the utility, like the user stories are met, then that would be interesting. So that would be kind of my take on this, is like I know some folks are looking at Envoy, there's Nginx as well, there's HA. I know, Danny, you probably are looking at HA, is that?
Yeah, the motivation behind this PR is Knative. So
I see.
Somehow I got roped in the Knative community, and they're very interested in service APIs and making sure that their use cases are being met.
Right.
And I want to say that I actually linked to some Knative documentation, or at least a Knative issue that's being used. It might be. I could double check as well, but yeah, long story short is it was my working with the Knative community that kind of drove me to start looking into this further. And Bowie, I'm glad you kind of brought up just this kind of how we're dealing with the match filter action, and at least from the Knative side, I'm questioning whether, you know, is it a match and then a filter and an action, or is it a match and then like a forward or an action, and then we apply the filters or the modifiers after we make the routing decision? So I guess to me, a very simple question is there any value in doing any kind of modification to the request before making the routing decision?
So I think the match makes the routing decision, and then you have filter, and it's probably very ambiguous right now, but we should definitely sketch out how a couple of the really popular ones implement it. I have a feeling that we can find something that's generally realizable, and then all the non-realizable stuff unfortunately has to go into extension right now, or not extension, but yeah, extension right now. So we just need to do a little bit of a survey just to make sure that we can get maximum buy-in from all the different implementers.
Yeah, I think.
Okay, maybe that was my misunderstanding from the API sketch, you know, from way back.
Oh no, that API sketch was. I think the intent was that match happens first, and then you have filter, and then you have action. But definitely clarifying this is what you're doing. So thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, Harry, you said something?
Yeah, and then that's what like my comment was like. I think Bowie put it very well as like adoption is very hard. So this is very geared towards Knative. I've been working on Knative this week, so this is geared to that. And I think HT also has similar concepts, which are also somehow tied a little more closer to Envoy than to Nginx or HA proxy, right? So that was a concern. I see a lot more about like, match filters and then action. That's more generally implemented even for cloud load balancers as well. So,
right. Yeah, so it might be helpful if, for all the implementers out there to just take a look at this and then sort of drop a comment as to like what you're seeing as like realizable. And then I think with that information, we can take this to the next step, which is kind of figuring out how the ordering makes sense. I'm hesitant to like designate an order right now without that information. But thanks, Daniel, for starting this up. I mean, it was just an empty type, so.
Yeah, and let me go back either in this PR or probably the associated issue, and just try to kind of call that out. And yeah, I think we just need to get input on what is kind of that right ordering, or do we need to support manipulation of requests both prior and after a routing decision?
Right.
I'm looking at the traffic split, and can someone explain to me how you actually use it? Like, how does it, what is the flow from a gateway to a traffic split?
It's actually,
yeah, let me
HTTP route.
Yeah, I think I try to summarize it. And so, you know, within a gateway.
Oh, you're doing it from gateway. Interesting.
Yeah,
I think the sketch had.
I mean, that's pretty fundamental, right? We should be able to see it from the spec somehow.
That's another question that I had, the same question that James had. That it's, where does it originate from? It's not very clear in this.
Ah, I see. Interesting. I thought that it would go off of HTTP route because that already has all the matching and the filtering. And then this would be an adapter for splitting it somehow across Kubernetes services.
Yeah, so we have something called actions in HTTP route, and it would go under an action. Like the default action would be to send everything to one service. And then traffic split would be like an add-on there.
Because then you would, if you put it on gateway, then you would have to loft all of the HTTP matching stuff into it somehow, which like might get complicated.
And it will also overstep with HTTP route. Like it will, both might overstep each other.
Yeah, in that case, like you might as well just merge them together if you really wanted like this Uber object.
So traffic split is a route, or
it's referenced from route. A route.
Right. So the HTTP route, for example, instead of having the forward to be a service, the forward to would be to this traffic split object, where we would then be able to specify how we want to split the traffic. And then I believe the traffic split has a forward to as well, which you could then specify the service that you would eventually want to forward to.
Yeah, I mean, this is like the most naive way to represent what we hear from a lot of folks is they have their load balancer set up, and then they're going to like canary a service or something like that. So then you're going to introduce the new service, right? And then like you messing with the traffic split to kind of shift it back and forth. I don't hear as much on the whole gateway level, although that is.
So that sort of makes sense to me, but I think we need some way to represent that in the spec, because I think you can read the spec and not make that connection.
Yeah, it has to be kind of written out like this is a HTTP action or something. So we need to kind of explicitly say it.
Within the traffic split type definition?
Yeah, like who can reference this? Or where is a valid one?
Where is it expected to be referenced from?
Yeah. That's what we get for Go types not supporting algebraic whatever. Algebraic data types.
Yeah, I mean, I think having in the Go doc for the type is probably the only place where we could do that for now. That's what the other reason for having the sort of the clearer definitions thing is to be able to say things like that to be able to be like, don't implement these without reading and understanding the API concepts doc, and the API concepts doc should tell you like where all the things that we are specifying should live.
Right. Okay, I think yeah, just popping up for everyone. So take a look. I think we'll discuss it in detail next session.
Yeah. Yeah, we've got a bit less than 15 minutes left.
Okay, oh no. So let's go to Nick's doc. Sorry, Daniel, I'm going to skip over the gateway label selectors because I think this one's also worth some time.
That's fine.
Okay.
Okay. So I think from what my feeling is that this is pretty close to something that I could PR into the API concepts doc. Starting from a current model, the idea of adding that current model heading was to, if anyone wants to, propose a straw man for some other model, then duplicate the setting, duplicate the lower sections and go to town. Yeah, so these are I think the key parts are this super short version that sort of is like a mission statement almost for each type of object. So gateway class defines a set of gateways with a common configuration and behavior. Gateway requests a point where traffic can be translated to services within the cluster, and routes describe how traffic coming via the gateway gets to services associated with the route. So I feel like that describes most of what we talked about in the last little while. Yeah, does anyone else? Sorry, James.
So but we have HTTP route. Isn't a route is not telling you how to get to the services. That's what, because the services are the back end, right?
But so a HTTP route
and that's
will
the
eventually.
Sorry, Nick, go ahead.
Sorry. No, you.
The forwarded thing, the forwarded to hop is what describes getting from the route to the service. So
sorry, yeah, I guess, I mean, I'm trying to keep it within a sentence, so I can't be too complicated. And so, but I think in this case, if you have like a set of HTTP routes that gradually sort of.
I have a way to resolve that, Nick. You should add the word APIs after the word gateway.
Via the gateway API gets to the services. So routes, sorry, let me go to where I can. So routes describe how traffic coming via the gateway APIs. Is that what you mean?
I think that includes what James is saying, how it's like, you know,
via all of these objects, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
So it might be that it may not be.
They're all considered gateway APIs? I thought we had just the gateway API.
Gateway API.
Service APIs.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So I actually think it's more concise to say this. I do agree, James, that there is a small thing there that like maybe you have a route that references a route that references a route that references a backend, but in that case, it's still, the routes are still describing how you will eventually get to the service, so it's still kind of correct. And in this more simple use case, it's very correct, if you see what I'm saying. Like, and the idea here is to do just a single sentence, and then for more detail and more correctness, you go to the other things. The idea is to be able to give someone an elevator pitch on what all of these objects are intended to do, so that we don't have the problem of people, spending 7 hours sort of reviewing the repo and being like, I still don't understand how all this shit goes together.
Yeah. No, I think this is, I think it's pretty good. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. Sorry,
James, you could PR the S in there. No, I'm just kidding. How about other folks on this call? Micaiah, Damien?
I was saying, how about it describes how traffic maps to services, right? The debate is over via what. We can just omit that entirely and say it's how traffic maps to services.
I think these short versions, Nick, at the bottom of this doc, I just provided my own short versions.
Yeah, I did. I saw those and I picked them up and folded them in a little bit.
Okay, cool.
Yes, I definitely did see those. But I thought the other thing that I've been trying to do is to keep it using as simple language as possible as well. Again, with the idea of if we can't explain it in a clear and simple way, then we don't have a good enough idea about what it is to actually build it.
Yeah, the other thing is we have more use cases.
I think maps.
Yeah, maps is a good word. I think we have more use cases than just HTTP routes. So that's my comment down there.
How about flows?
Sorry, what's that?
Sorry?
How about flows to services? FLOW.
But we can work on the wording, but I think generally.
So I think those three things are kind of pretty close, like close enough that we can, I can PR it and we can have a fun argument there about the exact wording, right? I think the rest of it, the next bit that's more important is to sort of talk about these sort of more detail sections.
Yep.
And I think, so there's a few things in this gateway class thing that are really important in my mind. Firstly, what I've done is I've taken that first sentence of the short version and made it be the first sentence of each section. And then go on and sort of just explain some more things about it. So an important thing here is that each gateway class will be handled by a single controller, although controllers may handle more than one. So the idea here is that there is at least a one-to-one correspondence between a controller and a gateway class, and maybe it might be one controller for more than one gateway class. But if you have a gateway class, you must have a controller to implement the gateway class.
Yep.
Should we say single controller or single controller type? Right,
what do you mean by that?
What I mean is, if I say, okay, I've got a gateway class foo, and I've got this foo controller that does something. Well, no, I need high availability for foo controller, and so I'm going to, use a deployment and have multiple of those controllers.
Yeah.
I think in that case, there's still a single controller in the sense that there is still a single copy, like a single piece of code.
That's that one's hard to.
Yeah. I mean, that in that case, effectively, you're going to have one be elected the leader and only one actually take the actions anyway. Right? Like,
fair enough. Yep.
Yeah.
Another scenario I was wondering about is, what if you have multiple aspects, such as I want something that creates an ELB and then something that sets up Route 53, and logically they're separate controllers. Is that a use case that would be allowed?
I don't know if the word controller is actually well defined. I think we all have conceptually mapped it to like a thingy. I think
personally, I would say that's like a controller. Everything that acts on that thing is a controller. But I agree. So
control plane or something. I don't know. Like you could put a little asterisk and just put these examples in there and just kind of define it that way.
Yeah. Again, part of the point of this is to sort of communicate the 80% use case so that people can get a general idea of what this is saying without being the final word on all the details.
We should probably
even this is not infinitive.
We should just put a little asterisk and just give those examples, just if you people have questions.
Yeah.
The one thing this raises in my mind is we should be clear about the audience we're talking to with the different documents we produce. So some especially in the Go doc, I think our audience is Ingress implementers. But there's other audiences too, which is operators and users trying to use the API, right? And it seems like maybe Nick has those audiences in mind as well when you're trying to choose the language here.
Yes, that is absolutely the case. Thanks for making that explicit, James. So I'm not only thinking about us as, counting us as the people on this call as implementers of things to deal with this, but also about the people who are actually going to end up writing the YAML for these things. So they're going to need to have somewhere to go to understand what these things are supposed to do. And
I think like we'll probably, after the dust settles a little bit, we'll scrape through the Go doc and actually reorient it towards the user, because they're the people who are going to be reading it like way more than right now.
Wait.
This is how we're communicating with each other. So sorry, go ahead.
Isn't the Go doc more for like, where's the docs for implementers then? If the Go doc is for API users, where's the actual specification with that you would have conformance requirements against?
That's a good question. I think it has to include both. But the thing is, like, most Kubernetes documentation is actually generated from the Go doc.
I mean, to me, this feels like something that goes on Kubernetes website.
Yeah.
Whereas Go doc is more technical and more, and there's room for both.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but
so
I know like people
again,
do the Go doc to figure things out. So
I mean that's what. So in my mind, this document is intended for me to pick up and drop into the top of the API concepts document.
Right.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was thinking too. That's perfect.
Yeah, that's what this whole thing is intended, so that when we say, people are like, WTF is this whole thing all about, we can be like, API concepts doc. There you go. That tells you what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do it. That's the that's the place to start. If you want to understand what we're doing, that's the place to start. That tells you the concepts that we're trying to do.
Okay,
that's sort of the broad thing. Yeah. So you're right.
We're
running out of time. So there's a bunch of stuff here like gateway classes, cluster scopes. I don't think that's the thing. Now, so I put a must there for there must be at least one gateway class defined. I think that's pretty straightforward. Like, you have to have a gateway class defined in order to have functional gateways. That was a good edit too. Thanks, Bowie. And then a controller that implements the gateway API does so by providing an associated gateway class resource. So basically, it's the combination of the gateway class and the controller that implements it that produces functional gateways. And then the other thing I wanted to do here is to sort of make it so that there's a bit of a translation layer for people who are familiar with Ingress but don't understand what we're talking about with this. So that there's hey, this is a little bit like in Ingress, the Ingress class annotation, but there's a lot more to it than that.
Right. Perfect.
So I think there's some wording changes we might need to do there. You can scroll down a little bit to make.
Yeah, the last sentence was I was confused. Like, what does it mean? The idea of storing extra information. Yeah.
So basically it's in for Ingress v1 for the Ingress class in v1. You can store. I think correct me if I'm wrong, Rob. You can store some extra information about the
you can reference. It's the same thing. It's an object reference.
Yeah, we can just probably not have this sentence because I found it confusing.
Okay, sure. If you found it confusing, I'll just take it out.
Yeah.
No problem. It's fine. Okay, I'll remove that in a moment.
It also has like it's not always something. However.
Yes. Okay. Problem solved.
Okay, let's go into gateway.
So this is an important thing. A gateway describes how traffic can be translated to services within the cluster. I'll fix that up so it's the same as the short version that we just wordsmithed a little bit. The important part here is it defines a request for a way to translate traffic from somewhere that doesn't know about Kubernetes to somewhere that does. Again, it's just trying to say that same thing in a different way. And then Bowie put an example there. I think that's great. And then, it's important. I think it's important to mention that for a lot of people, they're going to be thinking about outside and inside. I agree, Bowie, that it's not always going to be the case. And so it's good to have those words there, but we do need to make sure that people understand that this is the bit where if you are thinking in the outside-inside case, this is the thing that does that just defines the difference between outside and inside the cluster.
Yep.
It defines a request.
We definitely want to put it into people's minds that it's not just for outside because people get so confused.
Yes. So that the other part here is it's defining a request for a specific load balancer config that implements the gateway classes configuration and behavior contract. That's the configuration behavior contract is the thing that I think is the key. That's the sort of the thing that I'm talking about when I say that the gateway class and the controller sort of define how the gateway class will behave in the same gateway object under a different gateway class might produce very, very different outcomes. And so the other thing that I think is important is to sort of say, hey, maybe you may want to create the gateway by an operator, but also maybe the controller will actually create gateways for you if you want it to be more magic. Maybe you want it to be that your people create the HTTP routes and your controller actually watches for HTTP routes and then fixes the gateways for you, right? So you don't want people that sort of hits the super self-service use case.
Yep.
So I've got some shoulds and mays here about, should provider list in the definition to cover the, hey, maybe you just want to be like, hey, I don't care where this shows up. Just give me a port.
I had a comment there. We should discuss whether it should, because it, like for an Ingress user, they kind of omit it. So anyways, but I think
that's why I said should,
should means
I think
must. Isn't it?
No.
It may.
Should is like in most use cases. It's recommended to. Yeah.
I see. Well, it's confusing because it's a valid gateway spec, and then an optional thing. So you know what I'm saying? Like,
okay. So yeah. So maybe it's just I removed the valid word, but a gateway spec should provide a listener. And then the idea here is that may request addresses and ports, blah, blah, blah. And the may part there is important to say, hey, you can have any one of these or some combination or all that sort of stuff.
Okay.
And then
I think on the PR we'll just clean up the language. It might be a little confusing right now. So, but
that's fine.
The sentiment makes sense.
I think the should may those requirements sounds like it's they're written with a implementer's audience in mind.
They are, yes, you're right. That is definitely written with an implementer's audience in mind. So yeah, that is the tricky part about this, is that we are writing for two very different audiences at the same time. So anyway, the idea here, and then for the route section, the idea here is to say that should be various types of route objects define how the traffic via the gateway is mapped to Kubernetes services. And say currently we've only got HTTP and TCP route, but the entire idea is that people can add other routes.
And we can actually have a roadmap, because it's going to be us who's going to be adding those, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Okay.
So and then I wanted to add this migrating from ingress section to sort of add somewhere. I don't know if the API concepts doc is the right place or if this is a separate doc, but I wanted to have a thing there that says, hey, if you're migrating from ingress, here's how the bits that map to the bits that you've got here. So I mean, most of this is just what we were talking about before. It's just said in a slightly different way.
Okay, yeah, this looks good to me. We're also running out of time, but if anyone on the call has any feedback.
So I have one question. My name is Akshay. So basically, as we are talking about all these definitions about gateway class, this seems to be like when you're talking about load balancer, that is for that cluster. Suppose you have a cloud load balancer, you want to share it across multiple clusters. We don't have any, do we have any strategy of how that will be dealt? Suppose you want to have two clusters.
Ooh, that's a big can of worms.
Yeah, and you want to have same service deployed in both, and you want to have traffic split between 50% goes to one and 50% goes to other.
Yeah, that one is pretty big in scope in terms of we have to resolve, not we, but you'd have to resolve how to name things across clusters and so forth. So right now we're not opening up that can of worms, but I think we probably will.
We might have to.
Yeah.
But isn't that something that falls under the kube-fed umbrella?
They solved it one way, and there's some stuff cooking in multi-cluster SIG that actually sort of mentions gateway. I think the intent is to also use gateway. So there's some cross-pollination there. It's a very important use case. Trying to solve it at the same time we're trying to solve this might be pretty hard. So
I think we need to get it right for one cluster first.
If we can get more information, we can get the kube-fed thing over here and make the decisions over here in these meetings rather than doing it over there.
I don't know what the status of kube-fed is, but definitely there's some cross-pollination that is going on in the multi-cluster SIG. So
I think there's definitely a lot of stuff that needs to happen in the not too distant future about standard ways to do multi-cluster, traffic splitting and stuff like that. Absolutely, I think that if we can't get it right for one cluster, though, we're never going to be able to get it right for multiple clusters. So it is important for us to concentrate on do this first. But I hear you. I have had a lot of discussions with people, about using Contour for multi-cluster ingress and stuff like that. So it's on a lot of people's minds, mine included. The last time I haven't followed multi-cluster for a while, but the last time I did, I had a NIFI pattern about sort of federating specific types of objects and stuff that I don't think would work that well with this, but maybe it does. And also the other nice thing about the way that we're talking about this is that it's completely possible for a controller, the controller that watches the gateway class and the gateways doesn't have to live in the cluster that the things are doing. So maybe you do have a single controller that watches across multiple clusters, and which is I would anticipate.
And then you have admission controller that can talk to the admission controller of the central ingress controller, which can then do the validation across clusters.
Yeah, so hold that thought. I think, and also watch what's going on in SIG multi-cluster, and probably I would expect in a month or two we will sort of start kind of addressing or looking at some of these use cases.
Yeah, but I think, sorry, you go, Akshay.
Oh no, you go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I think that the way that we're defining the gateway class and controller combination as being the thing that defines how the gateway behaves is the bit that will mean that you can make that work with minimal changes to the actual APIs, because it's just that then your controller is going to implement some specific behaviors that happen to be about doing multiple clusters rather than anything else. Okay, can we just, I think that's almost the end of the doc. So if we just scroll down just a little bit more, yeah, but the thing here was just to sort of say, some of the bits from ingress have ended up in different objects. That's the sort of the point of that section. I'm not 100% sure where I'll put that. I think I'll just put the top part into the API concepts document. It will require a bit of munging of the words and moving the diagram that you did around, Bowie.
So
I'll have a crack at that. I'll have a crack at that sort of hopefully this afternoon, my time, and early next week. So it should be ready sort of early next week for a PR for everyone to have a look at.
Awesome.
On getting those in there.
Yeah.
And so I think, and that again, I think I really feel like the most important part for us all to be really clear on is the sort of the gateway class controller interaction is the central pivot around what everything in this whole setup is gonna spin.
Yep, this looks good. That's my opinion. So everyone, please take a look, and we'll be expecting your PR. And then thanks everyone. This was over time by 5 minutes. And then hold the thought on the multi-cluster. We're gonna get there, but probably not right now. All right, thanks guys.
Thank you.
I also wanted to say thanks to whoever's taking the notes, because those are really good notes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.